Nobody hands you the real number at closing. You sign about 40 documents that afternoon, and the largest cost in the entire deal appears on none of them. It is not the price. It is not the rate. It is not the fees the lawyer walks you through. By the end of this, I will show you exactly what that number was. And for the average family trading up, it runs well into 7 figures. Stay with me, because once you can see it, you will never walk through an open house the same way again.
I am Michelle Lane, but you know me from that channel as the cartoon-style character Money Mitch. Let me say one thing before we continue, and then I will not bring it up again. I have gathered all my knowledge in a book on my website. If you want it, it is there, just in the description below. That is all. Now let's continue.
Here is what makes this the most expensive decision most people ever make. It does not feel like a decision at all. It feels like a reward. The raise finally landed. The agent called it a smart move at the right time. Trading up feels less like a choice and more like the obvious next step. That is exactly why it drains more wealth than every small habit the budgeting apps love to scold you about. So let me show you a house the way your money actually sees it. Not as a milestone, not as an investment, as a bill that arrives every month for 30 years and grows while you sleep. Start with the trick sitting in plain sight. The price is the number you negotiate and lose sleep over. It is also the smallest amount that house will ever charge you. Think of the price as the cover charge at the door. The real cost is the subscription behind it, and that subscription has no cancel button. Picture a couple. I will call them Nate and Whitney. They are sitting in an ordinary house worth around $420,000. They have decided they have outgrown it. They want the dedicated office. They want the yard. The new place is $700,000. In their heads, that is a $280,000 difference. A big jump, certainly, but a one-time jump. That is the misunderstanding the entire industry is built on. Watch what actually happens to their month. At the same rate and the same 20% down, their principal and interest climb by roughly $1,400. That is before a single light is switched on. Over a 30-year loan, that gap alone is more than $500,000 in payments they did not previously make. And here is the cruel part of the early years. Almost none of those dollars touch what they actually own. In the first decade of a mortgage, you are mostly buying the bank's interest, not the house. So they spend years paying thousands more each month while their real ownership barely moves at all. But the mortgage is only the part you are allowed to see. The costs that do the real damage hide inside the square footage, and they all share one quiet feature: they scale. Throw out the idea that owning a home is a fixed monthly payment. It never was. Serious studies of the true cost of ownership land somewhere between $16,000 and $21,000 a year on top of the mortgage. Call it $1,300 a month, layered on whatever you already send the bank. Now notice what every one of those numbers is tied to: the size and value of the house. A bigger home does not cost slightly more to run. It costs more in every category at once, and the increases stack on each other. Property taxes are a percentage of assessed value, so the more expensive house is taxed harder every year, forever. Insurance is priced on what it would cost to rebuild, so more square footage means more to insure. Utilities scale with the volume you are heating, which means those extra rooms cost money on the days nobody walks into them. Then there is maintenance, the cost almost everyone underestimates and the one that punishes size hardest. The working rule is 1 to 2% of the home's value every year. On the ordinary house, that is $4,000 to $8,000 annually. On the $700,000 house, the same math is more than $10,000 a year, every year, in roofs and water heaters, and the 1,000 small failures of a building made of wood. A bigger house hands entropy more surface area to work on. So total it honestly: the extra mortgage, the extra taxes and insurance and utilities, the extra thousands in upkeep. Their upgrade does not cost them $280,000 once. It costs them roughly $1,500 more every month for the rest of their working lives. That quiet monthly leak is the whole story. And notice how it shows up, because this is why nobody fights it. It is never one dramatic bill you could brace for. It is a slightly larger mortgage draft, a tax statement that stings a little more each year, a power bill that runs heavy in July, a steady drip of repairs that never stops arriving. None of it feels catastrophic in any single month. That is precisely what makes it dangerous. A cost you can always just barely absorb is a cost you never fight. And a cost you never fight will follow you for 30 years and quietly empty the account you were supposed to retire on. Now let me show you the future that money had, because this is where a bad decision becomes a tragic one. That $1,500 a month is not gone, it is spent. The difference between spending and losing is whether the dollar could have grown somewhere else. Put that same $1,500 a month into a plain, low-cost index fund instead. At the market's long-run average, after 30 years, it becomes more than $3 million. Sit with that. The choice was never really between two houses. It was a choice between a comfortable retirement and a seven-figure one. And if that average sounds optimistic, use the inflation-adjusted return instead. The same $1,500 a month still grows past $1.5 million. In real purchasing power, the bigger house still costs them a fortune they will never see, because they are living inside it. There is no bill for that. No alert on your phone. No moment where someone hands you an invoice for $3 million. The wealth simply fails to exist, quietly, for 3 decades. And I have saved one more cost for the very end, because it is the one that decides whether you retire on your own terms or somebody else's. First, the cost that appears in no study, because it only starts after you move in. The bigger house demands to be filled. The furniture that fit the old place looks small and lonely, so you furnish. The sectional that fills the great room. The dining set for the formal room you will use twice a year. Studies of first-year ownership costs, counting furnishings and the inevitable renovations, run past $80,000. This is lifestyle inflation wearing a hard hat. And it does not stop at the furniture, because the house raises the floor on everything around it. The kitchen gets redone because everyone else's kitchen got redone. Your lifestyle expands to fill the container you bought, and the container was enormous. Which brings me to the trap that catches people who can technically afford the bigger house. And that is most of the people watching this. The bank's approval letter does not tell you the one thing that matters. Qualifying for a payment is not the same as being able to live underneath it. The lender approves you on your income today, in a good month, with no emergencies. They do not model the layoff. They do not model the year the furnace and the roof fail in the same season. They approve the maximum, and the maximum becomes the trap, because the maximum is exactly the number that leaves you no room. That is the cruelest feature of this decision. It does not fail loudly. There is no foreclosure notice for the family that is simply tight every month. The family that cannot quite max the retirement account. The family that puts the broken transmission on a credit card because the house ate the savings. They look successful from the street, and they sit one bad quarter from a real crisis, because the cushion became the mortgage. Margin is the entire point of money, and a bigger house is engineered to consume it. A family in a modest home with a manageable payment has slack in the system. They can absorb a shock. They can sleep through the night. Worse, the big payment costs you the ability to walk away. When your monthly number is large, you cannot take the pay cut to start the thing you keep thinking about. You cannot leave the manager who makes you miserable, because the next job pays less, and the mortgage does not negotiate. A big mortgage quietly locks both partners into their highest paying and highest stress jobs for as long as the loan exists. The corporate world calls that golden handcuffs. A bigger house is the same handcuffs, except you signed up at closing and called it the dream. So why do we keep doing it? The answer is not financial at all. It is psychological, and that is good news, because psychology is the part you can control. A bigger house is the most visible way to signal that you have succeeded. A larger investment account is invisible. Nobody drives past your brokerage balance and slows down to admire it. But everyone sees the house, the address, the square footage glowing on the listing, and it only ratchets one direction. You move up, and the baseline quietly resets. The modest house you would have been thrilled with 5 years ago suddenly feels like a step backward. Nothing about it changed. Your reference point moved. Let me put a second name beside Nate and Whitney, because the contrast is the entire lesson. A woman I will call Simone earns almost exactly what they do. When her income climbed, she did not trade up. She stayed in the modest 3-bedroom. She kept her payment well under a quarter of her take-home pay, and she set the difference to invest automatically the day after every payday. Watch the two lives diverge in slow motion. In year 1, you honestly cannot tell who made the better move, and the bigger house looks like the obvious winner. It is gorgeous. The housewarming is incredible. Simone's place looks ordinary, and a few people quietly wonder why she did not level up when she clearly could have. Jump to year 5. The cracks show, but only Nate and Whitney can feel them. The water heater went. Taxes crept up with the assessment. They are fine, technically, but there is never quite anything left at the end of the month. Simone has been funneling that $1,500 a month into index funds without thinking about it, and nobody has congratulated her once, because nobody can see it. Now jump to year 20, where the slow-motion collision finishes. Nate and Whitney have a beautiful, well-worn house and a retirement account that worries them at 2 in the morning. They look successful, and they feel trapped, and they cannot fully explain why, because on paper, they did everything right. Simone is sitting on an investment account in the high 6 figures with a nearly paid-down home on top of it. She can retire early if she wants. She has choices in every direction. From the street, Nate and Whitney still look like the ones who won. From the bank statement, it was never close. And here is the last cost, the one I promised you, the one that decides how your retirement actually feels. The wealth locked inside a house is trapped. You cannot spend a kitchen. You cannot sell the spare bedroom to cover a medical bill. An index fund can be partially sold in an afternoon. A house has to be listed and staged and shown and sold whole, often at the worst possible moment, with a slice handed to agents on the way out. I have watched people reach 65 looking rich on paper, a paid-off 5-bedroom house and almost nothing liquid to their name, forced to sell the home they love or borrow against it in their 70s, just to fund the life they assumed it would provide. House rich and cash poor is not wealth. It is wealth wearing a costume. So what do you actually do with this? You do not take a vow of poverty. Buy the house that fits the life you actually live, not the one you think you are supposed to perform for other people. Run the real number before you let yourself fall in love. Mortgage plus taxes plus insurance plus an honest maintenance budget of 1 to 2% of value. Then ask whether that figure still leaves you room to invest every month. Keep the all-in housing number under about a quarter to a third of your take-home pay. If it crowds out your investing, the house is too big, no matter what the bank approved. The bank profits when you borrow the maximum. Your job is to borrow the amount that leaves your future intact. And watch for the phrase that sells more square footage than any agent ever could. You will grow into it. People buy for the life they imagine arriving later, and that life mostly does not show up the way they pictured. They are left paying every month for rooms built for a hypothetical. Buy for the life you are living right now, plus a sensible bit of margin. You cannot get back the years of compounding you spent heating empty rooms. When the raise lands, fight the reflex to convert it into square footage. Bank the difference instead. Automate the gap so it leaves before you can feel it, exactly the way Simone did. And if you are already in the bigger house, you are not stuck and you have not failed. You simply have better information today than you had on the day you signed. Maybe that means staying put and never upgrading again. Maybe it means right-sizing later and freeing the trapped equity to finally go to work. So let me finally give you the number from the beginning, the one that appears on none of the 40 documents you sign at closing. It is not the price, and it is not the rate. It is what the difference would have become if you had let it grow instead of burying it in drywall. For Nate and Whitney, that number was more than $3 million, and nobody in that room was ever going to say it out loud. The bigger house was never the reward you thought it was. The reward is the freedom waiting on the other side of not needing it.